Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Zmira and I are really excited to be here with you and to talk about a topic that I think everybody wants to know a little bit more about. And so how tonight will go is that we'll spend about 30 minutes presenting some information to you this evening, and then we'll really open it up to questions. I know that we received a number of questions ahead of time, so we'll certainly do our very best to go ahead and answer those for you. But also just to let you know that if ever throughout the course of the presentation you feel that you have any additional questions or something comes up and you'd like to ask it, please feel free to go ahead and place it in the chat. And we'd be happy to take the last bit of the time we have together to really go over and answer as many questions as we can. So my name is Carrie Carson. I am a guidance counselor with the Lester B. Pearson School Board. And Zmira, maybe I'll just let you say a couple words about yourself before I get started.
And I'm Zmira King. I'm a psychologist at the Lester B. Pearson School Board and part of the Center of Excellence for Mental Health. I work both in elementary school and high school. And I did present last year, so maybe many of you who were, participants last year may remember me from my presentation. So welcome, everyone.
So tonight, as you all know, the topic for tonight's presentation is mental health and teens. So what parents need to know and how they can help. So I think Zmira would agree with me that in the high schools, we often get, a lot of questions surrounding, maybe my child is going through something, or I really want to be there to support my child. How do I go ahead and do that? And so I think this topic is something that, the two of us are certainly looking forward to talking more with you tonight and to giving you those tips and strategies to be able to support your teens. So in terms of tonight, we really are going to talk about mental health in general, and that the changes that happen in adolescence. Okay, we'll also talk about, the impact on adolescents, and what we can do to support them, right? And so, and when to notice when, things have, things are not going well, and when we should go ahead and intervene. So let's go ahead and get started with talking a little bit about mental health in general. So mental health is a state of well-being that encompasses how we manage our thoughts and emotions, our feelings of connection to others, and being able to manage life's highs and lows, and also to feel that we matter. Right. And I think at times what happens too is sometimes we believe that, that when we have or when we struggle, that perhaps we're not necessarily feeling well mentally. But what it's important to recognize is that even without a mental illness, you could have poor mental health. So we don't necessarily need a diagnosis to say that we have poor mental health, but just in fact, the opposite is that, even if we do have, struggle with, anxiety, or we struggle with depression or have a particular diagnosis, it is still possible based on other factors, for us to be having an overall good mental health. So Zmira, you can go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so when we look at some of the changes that happen during adolescence, so I think it's really important to look at the developmental piece, really. So when we're considering what our adolescents are going through at the time of development, we're looking at a period of profound growth and maturation of the brains. So what we're recognizing is that a lot of the adolescent development is happening surrounding the brain. There's this huge growth and that happens around the time of puberty. And what we're noticing is it's not necessarily just a physical growth in terms of, as we talk about adolescents having growth spurts, but the fact that there's also these metabolic changes, there's changes in sleep patterns and sexual maturation. But more so than even just, physical growth and changes, we're also noticing that there are changes in social dynamics, right? So, now there are questions surrounding peers and their social comparisons and status and prestige, and all of these new things that are happening that our adolescents, are dealing with at the time of this growth spurt or at the time of this, profound changes that are happening. And so in terms of, additional pieces for us to consider is that the exploration and development of their identity. So this is a time when our adolescents are really trying to figure out who they are as individuals, based on these new experiences and changes and feelings that they're having. They're also starting to develop this autonomy from their parents, right? And I think, many of us can, see within the schools, but also if you're, a parent of a teenager, is recognizing that, at around this time that our children or our adolescents are perhaps wanting to do more things on their own. Maybe they're wanting to spend more time with their peers. But at the end of the day, what we're noticing is that, they're starting to want this independence from their parents and to start to begin to, almost to live their own life and experience what it's like to kind of make their own decisions and to get out there and, and start that next step. And then we also noticed that, in terms of wanting to seek out new adventures, seek out new experiences, right? This is a time where they're realizing that, they want to see what's out there in the world. They want to, to go out there and to try new things. And they want to be able to have their own experiences. So we're really noticing that this is a time where, there is that piece where they're wanting to kind of, so almost spread their wings. So one of the things as well is that we consider, how does this growth and maturation, how did these changes, how did these experiences impact the everyday life of our adolescents? So what are the things that we notice when they're going through this, difficult period? So one of the things we notice is that there may be a tendency to experience emotional changes and regulation difficulties. So now they're going through these new experiences and they're having to learn to manage all the things that they're going through, all those sensations, make sense of what they're feeling, and to have it, to have it play out in the world that they're in. So how is this going to look? Who am I? How do I portray this new person or these new feelings or sensations that I'm experiencing? But at the same time, there also can be these feelings of being misunderstood or being different. So now that there's these new things going on, well, how does that, make me different than others? Or now I feel like people don't understand me, or now there are these changes happening and I don't really know what to think or what to feel about them. And I just feel like other people are not understanding what I'm feeling. And then there's this navigating of peer relationships, and that can become stressful. Perhaps now you're going through this, this challenging period, or this period where you're starting to feel different, and maybe you're reflecting on, the peer relationships that you have, and maybe you're not sure if these are the relationships that you want to continue with moving forward, or perhaps you're just reflecting on, how you feel about the friendships that you have, or what they mean to you, or what kinds of friendships you would like moving forward. So navigating this new sense of what you're looking for in terms of connections. And we know that relationships are important for overall mental health, good mental health. So therefore, you may be asking yourself all of these questions. And then there's also an increased sensitivity to social comparisons, status, and prestige. Now you're becoming an adolescent. There's all of these new experiences that you're having. Perhaps you're also, connecting with, some of your friends and comparing and saying, oh, well, how are they doing in school? Or, what is their, social status in the group that we're in? How do I compare to that? So it starts to really, increase this sensitivity or this feeling of, wondering where your place is in your peer relationships or your connections with others. And again, as we talked about before as well, in terms of the family dynamics, we often see that there's a shift, especially those with the parents. So now they're becoming independent adolescents. They want to have their new experiences. Perhaps they're not, wanting to be, to spend as much time with the family as a whole, or perhaps they, they're not wanting to be as open or to communicate or to go as deep into the level of conversations as they once did. But again, these are all all normal things that we would expect to see when there's our changes in terms of this adolescent period. And also this recognition in terms of expectation. There's this increase in demands. I'm getting older. There are things going on in the home. Perhaps I'm taking on new responsibilities. I'm now in school. I'm perhaps going to the next grade where things are becoming important. Now I need to consider, my future goals. And so there's a different level of expectations that are placed on, adolescents when they go through this important stage. So I think one of the most common questions that we receive, and Zmira can speak to that as well in the high schools, is certainly, when do I know if something is going, when do I know if I need to intervene? So how do I know what's normal and what's appropriate, and when to kind of step back, and when do I need to know when to step in? How do I recognize that moment? And I think some of the really important signs for us to consider in terms of mental health difficulties is when we start to notice these behavioral problems. If our child or adolescent starts to become more withdrawn or less engaged in the things that they're typically doing on a day-to-day. So if a child was typically involved in sports activities and are starting to withdraw from the things that they like, we may notice and sort of keep that note in mind that they're starting to withdraw from the things that they previously enjoyed, or they're less engaged or not motivated in school. But also we can notice additional emotional regulation difficulties in terms of perhaps they're more moody, they're more irritable, they're having more outbursts or crying more. Certainly these are things for us to look for. And in terms of constantly asking for reassurance, so we know that they're trying to establish their independence, but maybe an adolescent who's consistently asking, or is not comfortable with making their own decisions, this may sort of raise the question as to maybe something more is going on, or maybe they're struggling, or maybe they need some added support. Difficulty making decisions and getting things done, getting out of bed. So if we're noticing that our adolescents are, not able to make a decision, or we're asking them questions and the answers are constantly, I don't know, or they're struggling to do the day-to-day tasks that they would normally do in the house, if they're having trouble getting their homework done, if it even goes as far as to say, they're having trouble getting out of bed in the morning, or they don't want to do anything at all in the day. These are things that we want to look out for. And we talked a little bit about that lack of motivation and school refusal, right? So not wanting to go to school, feeling like they don't want, listen, who wants to do homework at the end of the day? I think we can say that most adolescents don't necessarily get excited about having to do their homework. But I think if they're starting to feel that they don't want to go to school, or you're starting to notice they can't get out of bed, you're starting to notice that they just absolutely won't attend, even with that reinforcement, then perhaps it's something that, again, we want to keep in mind. Sleep problems. So, adolescents who are sleeping too much. And I know we even kind of say too much, like, can an adolescent really sleep too much? But, when we're noticing sleep disturbances, when we're noticing too much or too little, or we're noticing that there's, interrupted sleeps, and these are things that, again, we want to keep in mind, as well as changes in eating habits, whether, eating more, not eating at all, eating much less. These are all signs that perhaps we need to evaluate the situation. But what I do want to highlight is that, just because our adolescents are experiencing some of these difficulties, does not necessarily mean that they require, further intervention, in the sense of, needing to necessarily jump to needing professional support. But we really do want to look at, how frequent are these behaviors happening? How long are they happening for? What is the level of intensity? Right? And also we want to ask ourselves, is it interfering with their everyday functioning? Right? So can they function even with the difficulties that they're experiencing? Can they get up and go to school? So these are certainly things that we want to do. And I think at the end of the day, we really have to trust our gut as parents and say, if we're noticing these things and we're noticing this pattern, that it's getting increasingly worse, so it's not getting any better, and it's been happening for quite some time, and it's starting to interfere with their daily functioning, then that's the moment where we say, what, it's time for us to reach out, or at least to support them as perhaps they're in need of added supports. So I'll pass it over to Zmira, who can talk a little bit more about, how we can go best about supporting our adolescents.
That was very informative, and I think that it's very important to have the background and the understanding of our teens in order to be able to help them adequately. We can't provide the help if we're not aware of what it is that they are going through and why they're going through. And as Carrie said, kids can go through ups and downs during adolescence. That does not mean that necessarily we need to be alarmed, but we do need to watch for what is going on. So what I would really like to do now is to just before I go on to tell you that the things I'm going to describe, I'm going to start with some general things, are things that I would recommend for parents to do whether your child is having difficulties or whether they're not having difficulties, whether they're experiencing some mild difficulties or even if they actually already getting support. These are gentle things that parents do need to keep in mind and will help the development of the teen regardless of where they are at. So I'm just going to. So the first thing that is very important to mention is the teen needs parents who are both loving and assertive. So in other words, we want to strive for kind of a balance between how much we have that limit setting and those boundaries with our kids and the loving and the warmth that we need to provide. And I will talk more about that a little later. But what I do want to talk about much more right now is the importance of modeling. I don't know how to emphasize how important it is what we do and how kids really observe and pay attention to the way we handle our own anxieties, our own difficult emotions, when we are faced with our own challenges. We know that kids often will mirror what parents will do. And this doesn't mean to pretend that everything's okay or to hide difficulties, although maybe we can edit a little bit, but it's rather about modeling how you can also experience frustration, disappointment, difficult emotions and stress, and that it's part of normal life and that you can handle it, that you can get through it in some way, that you have some strategies and you can get through that kind of difficulty. And the role modeling is very, very powerful for kids. And one of the things that is important in role modeling is also that language piece, the communication. So using language to express your emotion, to define and clarify what you're feeling. This is very important for kids to learn how to do that themselves. And obviously we want to start early, but we can also do that with teens. The reality is that kids know when something is wrong. They can tell if you're stressed, if you're having a bad day. And if you're not expressing it and you're not allowing them to know a little bit, have some transparency, then not only you're not role modeling, but you may cause them to even worry more about what's going on. An example for that would be, I'm giving an example maybe of a teen who's asking for help. Maybe, your teen is coming to you, they want a bit of help on a project. And you're really having a bad day, maybe you're not in the mood to help them, you're stressed, you're not in a good place. Rather than say, go ask somebody else to help you or try to figure it out yourself, I would more suggest, as this is a type of role modeling, is saying, well, grandmother's been very sick, I've spent a lot of time with her, I haven't been sleeping well, I feel kind of stressed and a little bit sad, and very hard for me to focus right now, and I'm maybe going to go lie down for a little while, and I will be able to help you later. I promise. So this way, you're not only modeling your emotions and showing that it's okay to feel these emotions, but you're also modeling that you're handling it in some way. And I think that's really, really important. Another important part is encourage hope and optimism in your children. So kids go through difficult times, especially now. You mentioned the pandemic. It's not easy for kids. They feel sometimes quite hopeless. Sometimes we all are feeling a little bit hopeless in these last days. But this is so important to do, to give them the hope. And it's not about saying it's going to be okay, it's just going to be fine. That's not always going to cut it. It's rather about letting them know that things do change. Even if things are not good now, they can change. And that in most cases, things don't last. And they don't last, especially if you do something about it. So a little bit of research I want to mention here is that it actually shows that when you tell people who are experiencing depression, for example, that they are able to change, that their brains can change, they are more likely to feel hope. They are more likely to want to do something about the way they feel and engage. They also are less likely to have their depression as part of their identity. And it provides them some confidence that things will be better. And I think this is so important to provide kids at this time. The next part that I want to talk about is what we need to do as parents when kids do show difficulty. So empathy, validation is the first thing that you have to show when you're reacting to your child. That's the way I would respond initially to when your child is coming to you, when they're feeling upset, when they're feeling down. You need to listen to them. They need to feel understood, right? Especially teens, if they feel that you don't get them and you don't understand them, they're not going to engage with you and they're not going to connect with you, and you will have less ability to help them and reach them. So this aspect is really, really important, how you respond to them and how you show empathy. And I will mention a little bit more about that as well later. Moving on to empowering teens. So after we show the empathy and the validation, we do want to give them a little bit of a sense of having some mastery over their problems. So empowering them means allowing them to be able to know that they actually can do something about it. They don't have to rely on you to fix the problem and do it for them. You can tell them that it is possible. There are things that they can do. Yes, you're going to be alongside them. You're going to support them. You're going to help them figure out what those things are. But you don't jump in to fix it. You don't jump in to change the situation for them. The skill that we want to teach kids is to learn to problem solve. And by doing it for them, we're not going to be able to do that. And lastly, I think Carrie mentioned it, is that if you feel like you're out of your depth, if you feel like you are really struggling with your teen, you're doing things that you feel like are helpful, and you're doing everything you can to reach them, and you're really concerned about symptoms or behavior, then it's very important to seek support from a mental health professional and to be honest and open and transparent about it. So let's look a little bit more into the details of what does this look like? What does it look like, all these different aspects I just mentioned? What do we mean by being empathetic and validation? So firstly, it's the way we respond. So your teen is having a difficulty. We want to listen with openness. We want to be able to control our own reaction to them. We don't want to have a reaction that may put them off, make them feel like they did something wrong, or maybe even punish them for their behavior or jump to conclusions. I will just listen. It's so important to just listen and not to dismiss, not to minimize, saying things like, oh, it's not such a big deal. You're making too much out of it. You're going to be fine. You're too sensitive. This is not going to help. Rather, I would use things like, I hear you. Sounds like you're hurting. I appreciate that you're sharing with me. Maybe you want to tell me more about it. And don't be just non-judgmental. Just listen and try and sort of have a good sense of what they're saying to you. As I said before, you don't want to jump in to fix things, and you want to offer hope. So this is what we talked about before. And what that means is that by offering hope and by saying these things, you have to remember that then the kids are more willing to think about what they can do. So everybody needs hope in order to be able to do something. If you feel like you're hopeless and that something is not going to change and you're stuck with whatever it is, you're not going to be motivated to get going, to do something about it, and you'll just probably just kind of disengage, right? So the things that we can say to kids at this time is, you're not alone in this. We will help you get better, right? We're not going to fix it for you necessarily. I'm not going to go and take it all away, because that's not our job. But we will help you do it alongside you, right? I'm going to look in what can be done about this. These things can happen, and maybe I have to think about it. I don't have all the answers, but I'm glad you told me. Let's think together how we can fix things. And this is where I'm going to really talk about the importance of flexibility. So we know that kids who are flexible, kids who are able to handle changes better, kids who are more open-minded and will less get stuck in labels, will be willing to try more things. And these type of traits really help us deal with stress and challenges better. We also know that kids who have autonomy or that can do things for themselves can be more self-reliant. Self-reliant means basically that they know they can do something for themselves, that they can know that they can rely on themselves to solve a problem. And kids who can problem solve and have good problem solving strategies are able to be more flexible at the same time because they have those strategies. So these are the skills we really want to teach them. We want to move away from things that create rigidity and does not allow them to have that flexibility. So the things that I would say would recommend to say is things like, it's okay to struggle or to feel unpleasant emotions or for things not to go our way. That's, happens to all of us. What can I do to help? What can you do to help yourself? What steps can you take to handle these problems? What do you need to do to get through this? And how can you think about it in a more helpful way? So I'm going to give a little example here. A good example would be maybe a child, maybe your child is not getting along, having problems socializing, or maybe has been sort of not really accepted by the social group very well, feels either lonely or feels rejected and is having difficulty with getting friends or making friends or socializing. So the way I would approach a situation like that with flexibility is saying, these things can happen. You've had friends before, you were able to connect with friends before, and maybe something is changing. Maybe your peer group has moved on, kids change, kids grow. But what do you think you can do to make new friends? What do you think you can do to get to the next, to maybe another group of friends, or to make a new friend? And some of the questions I would ask kids myself would be like, is there somebody in your classroom that maybe is kind and nice and, seem that you like them? What can you do to create that friendship? Maybe you need to send a text to someone. Maybe you need to do another step. And really it's about brainstorming with your child. What are the different things that you can do in order to be able to move along and be able to figure out yourself and problem solve how you can deal with this particular problem? Also, I think it's very important to pay attention to whether you're over accommodating and promoting avoidance and reassuring. What we know is that when things are difficult, when kids are feeling anxious, when things are not going well in school, when they're feeling any sort of unpleasant emotion or faced with a challenge, often for all of us, our go-to way is to avoid. Our go-to way is to just not do it. And sometimes we as parents, we want to take that anxiety and that bad feeling, so we want to take it away from our kids. So we over accommodate. So this will be something like, this child looks very anxious and they really are having a hard time. So you will maybe call the school and make an excuse for them to not come in. So this way you're accommodating their anxiety by allowing them to avoid going to school. Okay. And sometimes they themselves will do the avoidance, but you will sort of help them with the avoidance by doing things that will kind of reinforce it for them. Maybe they're not doing their homework and you're feeling really bad for them because they're very emotional, and you will maybe write a note saying that they didn't feel well, they weren't able to complete their work. Maybe they can't socialize, having anxiety about contacting a friend, and maybe you will do that for them. So that's over accommodating, that's promoting the avoidance. And really avoidance not only doesn't allow kids to grow and learn to handle it, it usually makes things worse. And kids can understand that. You can explain that to kids. The more you avoid, the more things get worse, because avoidance creates a relief in the short term. You feel good in the short term. You didn't go to school, you feel great, but only for that day. The next day you feel even worse because now you've missed a whole day and you need to get back to school, and you didn't spend a day in school, and you now have to even more get that kind of courage to go back to school. So the questions that I would first of all explain to kids this aspect of avoidance and how avoidance does create a lot of difficulties, and watch to how you are over accommodating or promoting the avoidance for your child. And ask them, how can they tolerate this? Yes, it's unpleasant, you feel anxious, you feel really unhappy about going to school, but how can you get to school and still be okay? Maybe there's something we can do to help you do that. Another point that is very important is to stay involved with your kids. Often they push us away. We talked about the fact that they want to be independent from parents. They don't want to share with us. They often do say, I don't know, and everything's fine, and they will really not share much. We know that. But you do want to stay involved. You don't want to micromanage. Kids don't want parents breathing down their necks. They don't want you to ask too many questions and pry. And sometimes they will not speak to you even if you do the right thing. But the way I would recommend to speak to kids to be able to have that connection is to talk with them rather than at them, to have that, to stay warm and caring while they talk to them, not to be emotional, to try avoid, making interpretation and conclusions if they are saying something. And if they decide not to speak to you about whatever it is that's bothering them, you can still stay involved by asking open-ended questions like, how did it go today in school? Do you have anything interesting to tell me about your day? What would you like to do today? Would you like to do something together? Would you like to go for a walk? Just show curiosity about stuff that they're doing, and try to stay connected in an indirect way. And maybe they will feel more inclined to share with you as they realize that you're not going to be mad at them, and you're not going to overreact, and you're not going to, take away privileges if they tell you whatever it is they want to tell you. So really pay attention to how you connect with your child in that way. Lastly, it's very important to maintain limits and boundaries with your kids. We often feel sometimes that kids are, our teen is feeling, overwhelmed and they're not doing well, especially during these times, the pandemic. We kind of feel sorry for them sometimes. We may think that, we don't want to put any more, demands on them. We want to avoid creating situations that might be unpleasant. And remember, this is, again, avoidance, right? This is counterproductive. So actually, limits and boundaries are probably more important than ever if you're during this time, and if your teen is struggling, because it allows them to stay engaged. It prevents the avoidance. It ensures a little bit more connection, and keeping to limits and to certain rules ensures that your kid will probably be more inclined to maybe sleep better, or maybe put their devices down, or do things that they're supposed to be doing. Again, if you can maintain those limits, be flexible. You don't want to be too rigid about it yourself, right? We want to model flexibility. A lot of these skills are about modeling how we would do it and how we would go about solving a problem. And one of the things that do happen is that when you want your child to face a difficulty or a problem, we usually really recommend to do it step by step, a gradual way. So if your teen is not going to school, doesn't want to do something, what is the first step that they can take? One little step, anything but avoidance. So even if it's, for example, just going to school for an hour, or going to school, but maybe not going into a particular class, and finding a way in which to get them to school without them avoiding not being in school, and then taking another step and getting closer and closer to being able to be in school full time. Because at the end of the day, you want them to be in school full time. So making these little incremental changes gradually really helps kids become more self-sufficient. So this is how we teach coping strategies and how we go about supporting them. I would say that to conclude, if I want to conclude some of the what are the most important points that I want you to sort of keep in mind, is that we want to respond to our kids or to our teens with empathy by listening and showing support. We want to model problem solving and how to handle difficult emotions and challenges in an appropriate way. We want to discourage avoidance and actually encourage our teens to make steps forward and to be able to become more flexible in the way they handle their challenges or their difficulties. And we want to guide them rather than doing it for them. We want to be staying alongside them rather than take the reins and sort of lead them. And these are really things that are ongoing. This is not something you do in a week. It's not something that happens even in a month. It's something that can happen over many, many months and even years, right? And if we have kids who don't have these skills, and we kind of not allow them to do these things on their own, they might struggle even more as they become teens. We know that anxious kids tend to be more anxious teens. And sometimes, even if they weren't anxious as children or haven't struggled, that transition into high school can bring out those difficulties. So these skills are so important for them to know. And having that conversation with your child about why avoidance is not helpful, what they can do, brainstorm with them, how they can help themselves. All these are really, really important and can go a long way in helping a child. So that concludes my my part. I will, I guess, maybe pass it on to our moderators to see if there's any questions in the chat, or we can go ahead and answer some of the questions that were sent to us in advance. What do you think, Carrie?
That's completely up to you. I think we can, you know what, maybe we should start with some of the questions that were sent in advance.
Okay, so would you like to start maybe, Carrie?
Sure. Well, I think one of the questions that, kind of speaks to what you had just talked about, so I'll address that one first, is there was a question about procrastination and increasing level of anxiety when it comes to school and to work. And I think that sort of lends very much to the information that you just presented in terms of, really wanting parents to stay involved, but not micromanage, not necessarily jump in and fix for them. But I think we have to validate that when, our adolescents or our children are, struggling or they're, procrastinating with their work, this is often an avoidance technique, right? Perhaps they're feeling, stressed by the situation or the type of work that they have to submit. And so they have a tendency to want to avoid and to leave it to the last minute. And I think as parents, one of the things we can do is we can certainly validate the experience and let them know that we understand that it's really hard to keep up with school, or we understand that there are some projects and things that can be more stressful, or, perhaps, you don't like an oral presentation. And so that's the one you typically leave till the end because, you don't really want to do it. And that's your way of kind of saying out of sight, out of mind. But I think what we can do as parents is really validate their experience, letting them know that we truly do understand what it is that they're going through because we've been there once, but also to let them know that we're there to support them. Certainly keeping the lines of communication open, letting them know that, if they would like, to communicate, or if they'd like to share with us, that we'd be open to supporting them and helping them problem solve and find a solution that would be helpful for them so that they don't have to feel stressed or overwhelmed. Perhaps we can just, practice strategies with them and let them know that, in times where, I feel stressed or overwhelmed and I feel like not doing something, I try to push myself through that. I take a deep breath and I sit down and I problem solve and figure out how I can tackle this particular issue, or how I can tackle this particular, homework assignment. And you might even be able to say to them, listen, would you like to brainstorm together? Would you like to sit down and look at what you have to do that's causing you to feel overwhelmed or anxious, and see if together we can make a plan, right? That would help you this project, and that you'd be able to apply to the future, so that perhaps the next time you feel overwhelmed or stressed, you'll already kind of have that skill, that you'll be able to break it down on your own into much more, smaller, manageable tasks. But then also, again, just to remind them that you're there every step of the way if they feel like they can use some extra support. So, that would certainly be how I would, address, procrastination and how it increases, one's level of anxiety as a parent.
Yeah, I agree with you, Carrie. And like you said, it's the making the plan is really, really important, because procrastination really requires, again, taking a step forward. It's, again, an avoidance technique. So if they take one step forward, one thing they can do, they don't need yet to complete the assignment, but you make a plan with them how they can take little steps to complete it eventually, then at least they're not at least you're discouraging the avoidance, and they're seeing that they are able to do something, which then may lead to the next thing that they can do.
And
So
I
I'm going
think
to move to,
sorry, Zmira, even just to add on to the piece that you said, just as a reminder that, you know, we really want to encourage them to make the steps, right? To say what the goals will be. We want to sort of avoid kind of, you know, to making those steps for them or what we think would be appropriate, but rather really encouraging them to, you know, to be an active participant in the plan and to make the goals that they feel most comfortable in terms of meeting their final goal.
I'm going to move to another question. I think I'm going to go with this question. What is the best way to respond to a teen that expresses suicidal thoughts? So this is you know, a big question. I would definitely show calmness. What I talked about, the way you respond to it becomes very important. So you don't want to respond with alarm and with emotionality. You want to talk to them about it and maybe get as much information. But in these kind of cases, even though suicidal thoughts sometimes can be quite, you know, can come, you know, here and there with teens, it's not so unusual, do require maybe a little bit of an assessment with a mental health professional to make sure, where are these thoughts coming from? How profound are they? Are they just passing thoughts because of a bit of stress that, you know, the child or the teen is experiencing? Or are there much more than that, and maybe a sign of something that requires much more intervention? So I would recommend to have a teen like that speak to a mental health professional. Carrie, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So one of the other questions that was asked is, how do we increase our adolescents' level of confidence in order to have them just be successful in the world? And I think, you know, we've really talked about a number of strategies in terms of being open and encouraging them, letting them know that you believe in them, letting them know that you support them, but also having them kind of, you know, make those mistakes and supporting them through it, not fixing it, but helping them develop the skills that they need in order to be, you know, to be able to tackle the everyday challenges of life, or even those extra, you know, those extra challenges that they might see in the future that, you know, they've never seen before, but they'll be able to utilize the skills that you've already supported them with. And again, if you're somebody that typically has, you know, does deep breathing, does meditation, things like that, where you want to kind of, you know, pass along those really amazing, just general coping strategies that can be used in day to day, I think that that's, you know, a fantastic thing that we can do and a level of connection that we can have. But I would also say, in terms of teaching our adolescents how to advocate for themselves, for me, that's a really important one in order to kind of build their confidence and to help them be successful, is to teach them to, when they need something, to be able to, you know, find the right avenue, the right people to ask for that level of support. So if you are struggling in school, or you are needing something in the workplace, or wherever you're at, to be able to open those lines of communication and really talk about what you need, because people are not mind readers. And I think sometimes we get caught in the moment of thinking, well, they'll just know what I need. But the reality is that we often don't. And I think adolescents really need to learn that in order to have your needs met, you really do have to communicate what it is that you need and to be clear about it. So to teach them the ways to do that would be certainly be a crucial part of building their confidence and giving them the skills to be able to, on their own, get their needs met, so that they don't require to come back to us, you know, every time they need something.
Another question. I have a daughter having trouble to cope with changes with primary school to secondary school, mostly socially. So this is actually quite common. Even if your child did not really show a lot of difficulties or a lot of coping, or a lot of difficulty coping in elementary school, sometimes the transition to high school can be challenging. Some kids have more difficulty adjusting. Maybe they don't have any friends who are going with them to high school, or just the changes and the demands, as we have spoken at the beginning, that increase of demands are hard for some kids, and sometimes the social aspect can be very, very different. So let's go back to a little bit of what I suggested. So you brainstorm with your child. What do you find difficult? What is it that you're finding difficult socially? Is it talking to other students? Is it finding things to do with them? Is it because they're reacting in a different way to you? how can you connect with someone who has, who has been in your environment at school that you have connected with? They probably, when you do that and brainstorm, you find that they have been speaking to other students, that they are kids that they may be, socializing with, but not necessarily feel that they've connected to as a friendship. So what is the next step that you need to do? How can you become a friend? Maybe sign them up for activities. Hopefully they will be coming back. I think they are coming back from what I heard from the announcement today. And to help figure out what would be the right thing for your child to be able to socialize and to connect with students at school. And sometimes within school, some high school do have either groups or programs where they sort of support kids with the adjustment and with their transition to high school. So you may want to ask if that exists in your school.
Okay. And one of the other questions we had too is in terms of performance anxiety. So I think this is something that we also see quite a bit in the schools in terms of just wanting to perform in terms of expectations as well. And I think that as it's really important for us to help our teens set realistic expectations, but also to believe in their ability to be successful. So oftentimes, they're worried about, perhaps, future goals, or, they're worried about that oral presentation, or it's very specific to certain things that really causes them to, freeze up in a test, or, not want to go in front of the class. And so what I would say is, again, I think the common thread here tonight is really to kind of open those lines of communication, to have those discussions about what's going on, to support them as much as we can, and to give them that positive reinforcement and that confidence boost, to really trust in themselves and to believe in themselves. But that if they are needing additional supports or needing specific strategies, and you feel that perhaps maybe you don't know how to best support them, or that they don't have any ideas of things that might help them during that time of test, or to support that presentation, that there are professionals within the school that can guide and support them in developing those strategies so that they can face those challenges and feel more confident when they're doing so.
So we have we had quite a few questions sent in advance. I'm going to choose one more. I've chosen one more, and then maybe we can go to some of the questions in the chat. So this question is, what to do when your teen cries a lot and won't tell you why they are crying? So this can happen. Crying is one of those things that we do see the emotionality in teens, but if they're crying a lot, and this is not just something that happens once in a while, and you can't figure out what's going on, they won't communicate with you. We need to go back to why they're not communicating. Do they feel that you may have, may be mad at them? Maybe you will react in a not very good way. Maybe they're embarrassed. And even if they are not saying anything, you can have that conversation, a one-way conversation with them to tell them that you're there just to listen, that you're not going to judge them, that if you don't know what's going on, you can help, that you're concerned. Maybe they want to talk to somebody else. Maybe it's not you. Maybe it would be somebody that they can feel more comfortable speaking to. But I think it is something that needs to be addressed. And if your teen completely refuses, this is another issue that I've had quite a few times with parents who are telling me that they know their child is struggling and needs help, but they absolutely refuse to talk to them or to a professional, and they really don't know what to do. So what I would recommend in these situations is that you can seek help, even though it's one-sided, and you go to a professional maybe for just a little bit of consultation of what you can do as a parent to help guide you how to handle the situation, and maybe eventually get your child to be able to accept support and open up and tell you why they're crying. But a teen who's crying a lot is a teen that probably is telling you that something is bothering them and they're not handling their emotions very well. And I would highly recommend that you do seek help for them. So I guess we'll have our moderators maybe suggest questions from the chat, because I haven't seen them.
Thank you both. There are questions. I really hope everyone who sent in their questions feels like they were answered in the presentation. Zmira and Carrie took that into strong consideration. So hopefully everyone feels taken care of. We'll do our best. one of the questions, it just loops back to what you were saying about suicide. The parent was just saying that they thought their daughter was doing well in school and at home and it looked well enough, and they ended up in ER because she tried to commit suicide. Are there other signs than the ones mentioned?
Okay, so there was no signs. Is that what they're saying?
Not, they thought that she was doing well at home and at school.
That can happen, and often it's kids who seem to be doing well that we find that they're not doing well. So they're presenting really well. They're usually kids who are very good kids, don't want to get into trouble, really want to succeed, want to please everyone, themselves, their parents, their friends, and seem to be, doing pretty well. But because they want to be good kids and they don't want to cause trouble and they want to, be seen as, as well functioning, they will also not come and let parents know what's going on until maybe something really snaps or they just can't take it anymore. And that's where I would go back to what I suggested at staying involved with your child. So staying involved with me, meaning even if your child looks like they're doing well, you can spend time with them in some capacity, and ask them how things are going, show curiosity about school, ask them whether they're feeling overwhelmed about the work they're doing. Is it too much? Do you feel, are you enjoying school? Are you getting along with your friends? Just ask questions, and you don't have to do it in an interrogative way, like all at once. You can be, walking with them and maybe just bring up a couple of questions and another time a few other questions. And I think if you are connected to your teen in that way and something is going on and you've always modeled, and I'm going back to the modeling, that you don't freak out, they're not going to be punished, you're not going to be super disappointed with them if they're telling you that they're not feeling well, then they're more likely to share. And I mean, there's not an exact answer, but those are the kind of things that I would like you to keep in mind. And I wouldn't say that there are any particular signs that you can look for. It's really being able to connect so that your teen will share with you what is it that you can do to help your teen open up to you.
Right. Yeah, that seems to be a theme in the questions, is just kind of how to get your teen to talk to you when they're being
defensive. I want to answer that just in general. We do have a slide, and if anyone wants to, I can share the entire presentation, but we have a slide which I haven't shown, which is resources. And there is one link that has excellent information, including videos about a lot of different topics. One of them is how to talk to your teen, how to connect with your teen, and with a lot of, so I had to rush through things because we have such a short time to cover all these topics, but there you can actually go through, through it with plenty of time, in your own time, and there's a lot of information and a lot of ideas on how you can connect and have your teen actually maybe open up to you. And there's actually examples, there's even a recording of a conversation and how the conversation didn't go well and how you can make it go well. So it's really very informative. I really like that website, and it can be very helpful for parents, because connecting with teens, they always, always a difficult topic with parents. They never want to talk, they never want to share. This is part of why they're teens, right? They want to do things on their own. I think Carrie explained it really well. They just feel like they want to disconnect a little bit from parents, right?
Yes, we will send out that link. That's everyone sounds like they want to hear from you about that. So I think one of the themes I'm seeing too is just the whole idea of like when to look for help. And I know you've commented on it a few times here, but just again, kind of what does that avenue look like? At what time do I say, okay, this is beyond teenage angst and I really need help? And where is that help, or what does that look like when I decide that day?
So I think Carrie did talk about three aspects of it. It's the frequency of the problem. So if your teen is crying and it's just a one-time thing, maybe they're crying on a Saturday and they haven't cried before, and then by the next Saturday it's over, then I wouldn't worry about the crying. But so frequency, crying every day, crying frequently. So intensity and frequency are both, sorry, I'm getting mixed up. So intensity, there's a lot of crying going on and it's happening very, very often. And the last thing I think Carrie mentioned was interfering with functioning. So if your teen is saying, well, I'm a bit anxious about school, exams are coming up, I'm worried about my grades, but they're going to school and they're handing in things, but maybe they look a little nervous, maybe they're a little reluctant sometimes. that's less of a concern. But when they're so nervous and so anxious about school that they're not going to school, or they're becoming very emotional, and again, this is daily, this is the frequency, the intensity, and it's beginning to affect their functioning in their everyday life. That's definitely.
And also the length of time, right? The duration as well, right? So is it happen, just a couple of times? Is it happening for a week? Is it happening now for 3 months where there's consistency? So I think we also have to take that piece into consideration and say, this has been going on for a really long time now. And I'm starting to feel, and I think it's a parental gut too, right? I think we recognize more times than not, our gut starts to tell us that something is just not right. It seems beyond, that regular teenage, worries and concerns. Let me talk to them or talk to them about getting the support that they need.
There's other signs like weight loss. If you're, teens who don't eat and they're really losing weight, that look really, really tired because they're not sleeping and they're falling asleep, being told by teachers they're falling asleep in class, or they're coming home and just not able to do anything because they're so tired because they haven't slept all night. If they are on, teens are on their devices a lot, so that's really difficult to discern how much. But if there's so much on the devices that it's actually it's almost a coping strategy, and being on a device is not just because they want to have fun with their friends or on social media, but they really need it to function, because otherwise they feel they can't handle. Those are also very important signs. So outbursts.
There's another example from a parent about shallow cuts on their skin and what to do.
Right. So that's a whole topic in itself about kids who self-injure. We do see kids doing that when they don't have a lot of other coping strategies. So they are feeling maybe some anxiety or some despair, or have difficulty regulating their emotions. And rather than use good coping strategies, they resort to some things that are not very good, and cutting may be one of them. There's different theories why this is helpful for kids, but I think, again, parents should not be alarmed. I think they can have the conversation with them, about it, but stay calm and ask if there is anyone that can help them, right? Find somebody who can talk to them and help them develop those more positive coping strategies, and see, how they can find a different way to cope with their difficulties, and what is the difficulty to start with. Yeah.
So one of the questions that a couple of questions is about kind of what the kids can tell us. Maybe they can't tell us anything. That their siblings and their friends think there's a problem, but their child will not come forth with it. So if it's just a silence issue, then I guess you start to observe behavior if they're not willing to speak about it. And then it's just kind of another question is kind of to what extent can teens and preteens, are they capable of recognizing how often they have some control over their thoughts and emotions. So it's kind of more about, I guess, from the child's perspective. I know we're trying to communicate with them, but then how much can they participate?
I think teens in high school, 12, even younger, they notice when things are not going well. So do you agree, Carrie? They can tell. Even younger kids can tell us that they're having a lot of bad thoughts, or they're not feeling good inside. They're feeling, maybe irritable. Maybe they're feeling like they're not as happy as they used to be. In fact, today I had a grade 7 student who's 12, and these were her words. I feel like I'm not as happy as I used to be. So they do have those kind of insights, I think. And in fact, sometimes adolescence makes them more aware of these things, actually. And because it's sometimes new feelings, things that they're not so used to having, or don't know what to do with, and they don't have the sophistication to understand them, that's when maybe they are reluctant to share and, to pretend that everything's okay, because maybe there's something wrong with me and I don't want anyone to know that there's something wrong with me. I want to look fine to my friends and my parents, right?
So we've given a few examples of crying, but what does it look like for other kids, other genders? Not everyone's a crier. Some people express it in different ways, maybe irritability. That's just one of the questions from a parent. What does it look like, let's say, with
What do you see sometimes, Carrie? I do see crying, maybe temper tantrums.
Well, I was just going to say crying, anger, frustration. I mean, sometimes things come out as one thing and there's something completely different, right? And I was sort of going to just add to what you had been previously saying, where, in terms of ability, sometimes students will come with what they believe the problem to be because they're not fully understanding it or making sense of it, only to find out that there are other things going on. So, it really just shows the extent to which the iceberg, right? What we see on the top is not always, everything that's going on underneath. And so for every student, it can be unique in terms of how they present. It's really about what they're feeling and how they're making sense of it as to what's going to come out in terms of visibly what we see.
Yeah. And what I said during the presentation about using language to describe emotions, that's part of what kids really need. They need that from a very young age, actually, from an early age, to learn how to express their emotions in using words and using language and to define what they're feeling. And kids who are not able to do that very well tend to have difficulty telling you what they're feeling, right? So again, if we can model or we can maybe help them sort of define what they're feeling, that can be helpful.
I'm just going to close with a couple of questions. I'll just let you know what's coming. So the first one would be about the big question in the room is parents asking about the pandemic. You did mention, trying to stay hopeful and everything, but like what have you seen? Do you have any extra advice from what you've learned from your observations, let's say? And the next question would just be, just as a closure, what's the best avenue to get help? Is it the family doctor? They've tried contacting private counselors, but no one has time. I've personally heard that the system is pretty full. Most counselors are full these days. So what's the two? So pandemic first, and then avenues.
Pandemic, Carrie?
Well, so that's quite the topic. But I think, I think at the end of the day, in terms of just really, supporting and being open, but also not placing sort of how we feel about the pandemic onto our adolescents, sort of being open to that they may be having their own experiences, that they may see it differently, that they may be impacting them more than it potentially is impacting us. And that may not be true, but just sort of, throwing that out there, that we don't really want to place how we feel onto them. We really want to allow them the opportunity to express themselves, to talk about how it's making them feel, to let us know what it is that they need, and then obviously to do our very best to support them in managing their stress or to managing their worries, and how we can also relate to them and letting know if we do feel the same way and how we're coping or the things that we're doing to model that for them and say, what, I understand, I feel certain things too, and this is what I've been doing in order to be able to support myself and take care of myself. And so what kinds of things do you think would be helpful for you? So again, really just, opening that door to be able to have those conversations and letting them share with you what they're feeling and going with them and what they're experiencing, and not necessarily what we are.
Especially the younger kids, the 12-year-old, 13-year-olds, the 2 years of the pandemic, they were, it's part of their lives now in a way that they almost don't know how to be an adolescent without them, right? They're going into the teen years with these experiences. So, and it has had an impact. It has changed the way, things, evolve around them, and opportunities that they may have. And we have to recognize that. But I think what Carrie says, if we allow our anxieties or our opinions about it to sort of permeate into their sort of, thoughts and their minds, then they're going to experience it the way we experience it. So if they hear a lot at home, oh, the pandemic is terrible, we can't function, it's devastating, that's probably how they will feel, right? Yeah, and in terms of getting support, I would say, yes, you can start with your family doctor because they would probably make the referral. You can also go to the school, depending which school they are at. Many schools do have some mental health professional now that can support, at least to some extent, or at least will be able to direct the parent to where they can get support. Because there are a lot of mental health problems in the past year, there is, more difficulty getting help, in a timely manner. I do see more cases, and but I would start with pediatrician and approaching the school and seeing if there's somebody who can at least give some kind of support to your child, within the school system. Yeah.
I was going to close on that, but now I'm seeing a theme through about 5 questions about anxiety and meltdowns. So there's one who their child, how to help a child during a meltdown, like what concrete steps can we take? I think I know that Jenna spoke about that. Maybe we could refer them to the other webinars we've had. But the other one is that there's some students having panic attacks in class.
Yeah, we see that.
And then how do we help our teens with anxiety flare-ups?
So I'll quickly talk about, it's a big topic, panics. But,
the last one,
yeah,
the one last thing about being anxious is about, I mean, we've already spoken about this, but anxious teens around friends and romantic relationships, but just seems to be a lot of anxiety questions. So I just wanted to group those together.
Any anxiety reaction, especially a panic, needs to be, again, the response to it is going to make a big difference to whether the panic will become more of a problem. If we respond with panic ourselves, and if we really get, very alarmed by it, if we show that we're really concerned and we don't stay calm, that gives the message that there is this, reaction to the panic, and it's reinforcing it next time. What you want to do is really stay calm within the panic, and then when it's over, it will be over. Have those conversations with the teen. It's a feeling in your body. This is how anxiety works. Sometimes it becomes very, very, intense, and you may feel like you can't breathe and you feel like you're going to die, but it's just a feeling in your body. It's just chemicals, really. And those are kind of things that we mental health professionals do with students. We educate them. The part where we educate them about the symptoms is in itself is very, very helpful, because they really do have a sense of understanding that they're not going to die from it. And if it comes, it is something that they're going to be okay with. So that they really need help. Like panics are things that I don't expect parents to be able to do that on their own. Kids who have significant anxiety reactions, there are things parents can do. Everything we talked about are things that they can do, but I don't think that parents can do that completely on their own. And sometimes we need to seek help for that. Yeah.
Right. Well, they were saying it was in class too, but one of the last questions here in the chat is just about what about not when you don't have a family doctor and the person at school says they don't have time to take care of all the students.
You can always go to the CLSC. You can always call and ask for services through your local CLSC. Again, I cannot say that they're going to see your child immediately, but it's a good place to start. I think that there is a problem with and unless, you can go privately, there is a problem with the public, there's a lot of waiting lists. I know that I've experienced it myself when I make referrals for students. But start, do it, make an application, at least you know that your child's on the waiting list. And if you feel like you're really struggling and your child really needs help, then go back to your school and see if they can find some way to give some kind of support. I think that would be something I would recommend, to advocate for your child to get some support. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Zmira and Carrie. There's one more coming in. I'm trying to say goodnight, but
yeah.
Let's see. Oh, there's someone giving advice about going to University de Montréal, I think. University.
Yes, there are other services. There are through the hospitals. They have services. They all have waiting lists, though. But it's good to call them all. You can access any service and try to see which one sees your child first, right? Yeah, I would recommend to do that.
Sure. So do you know? Is it maybe Concordia, McGill, UDM?
They have some clinics that you can that do see, I think, external clinics. I think more through the hospitals rather than universities, like external clinics from. I know that the Jewish has the Herzl, and there is the Children's has its own clinic as well. So you can maybe try and see if you can get a referral there. I know Agence Omet has their own clinics as well. That's another service that you can try and access. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Carrie and Zmira. We definitely wanted to hear what you had to say tonight. We all came to be together. And we thank you so much for your time and your expertise and sharing that with us tonight.
Right, and I will share with you the slides and all the resources, and then you will send it out to everyone, right?
We'll send out the recording and we'll send out all the resources that were mentioned. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good evening.